Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker is Tobias Bornakke. He was the head of the Nordic Council's think tank on big tech and democracy. He's also a partner at Analyse Tal. And in addition to that, he is a member of NORDIS advisory board, and we're very happy to have him and also to have him speak here at our conference. So please, Tobias, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm a little late. I'm sorry for that. I'm also the substitute of a substitute. So this presentation is like one of those where you think, how I'm going to get through this. And to make it even more difficult, I decided that I will do half of the presentation on the topic that I was given, and then half of the presentation to try out an argument that I haven't tried before. So this is like the first time I try to share it with a bigger group. It might fail completely, then just not, and I'll leave and we don't talk about this experience. But this is like, so I will give a presentation of a project that we did together with Tjekdet and Common Consultancy and me from Analysis and Numbers. We did this study of potential Russian attempts to influence the EU election. And then I will say, and this has been the setup that we have done a couple of places, actually a number of elections, most publicly known in Norway, where we studied several elections. We had this setup running, monitoring if there's any attempt to affect the election in Norway. But then after doing that presentation of the more traditional way, I'll try to take you into my own considerations of how are we going forward with this? How is AI and the way that we've been working with disinformation, maybe also some changes in how the Russians are working with disinformation, meaning that we need to think about this in another way, in particular in the Nordic region. So that's very ambitious. We hope not to fall. Also, just to mention all the names, you see we were a lot of people here doing the real study, and then we decided to team up with the factor-checking organization in Finland and Sweden. And thank you very much for that collaboration too. So what was the background? Well, around this time last year, a number of people decided to start to talk all around the globe about something coming up. They basically sat down on a map and they decided to like, hey, how many elections are coming? And the map started looking like this. And suddenly a trending topic were the ultimate election year. Because we had never in the history of mankind had so many democratic elections, so many people going to vote in the same year. That could be a risk, of course, always with disinformation. What made it a bigger risk was that we at the same time were experiencing all these new AI technologies emerging. We saw the first bot armies that were actually driven by generative AI. And we saw some changes in how the affection and the attempts to affect elections were changing. So all these discussions about so many elections coming up with AI on top of it that we really couldn't look through and how would it affect it meant that a lot of people came out, including myself together with a colleague, saying we have to be careful about next year. This could go terribly wrong. It didn't. But it led us to start a lot of projects where we wanted to look into the elections. This project, we got funding from the EMFI, the EU Foundation of European Media and Information Fund. And we wanted to empower the Nordic fact-checking on social media using algorithmic tools and open source intelligence. And at the same time, together with these fact-checkers, we wanted to investigate if Russian disinformation is spread before, during, and after the EP election on social media in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. So basically, we wanted to combine the resources of us as data scientists with access to more or less all social media platforms and millions of data points, together with Common Consultancy, which works in like investigating open source intelligence, and then fact checkers in spreading this out and making sure we actually have some cases on it. We set up this filter, you could say, going from pulling down a huge amount of data from TikTok, Facebook, X, and YouTube. And we took this data and we ran it through some algorithms that try to like look for like sharing, like coordinate link sharing. And we also looked for bursts, like where we could see someone trying to make something trend. Very simple algorithms. And then we made open source qualitative analysis of this. And where we did find some interesting results, something that could be a Russian attempt to sway the election, we forwarded to the fact checkers. The goal were both to get some methodological insights on how this approach would work in a new AI situation, but also to raise awareness about the potential potentiality of people trying to sway the election from outside. We set up a period. We looked from May 9th into July 9th, and that's primarily a resource thing. It takes a huge lot of hardware and software to run these processes and draw down all this data. So we always have to like kind of say, this is the period that we work with. We use the GECs, and I think this is probably familiar to most today because this has become mainstream, but we still think this is a very good framework to think about how Russian ecosystem of disinformation are trying to sway elections or public opinion in European countries. So just to go through it very simply, it says that Russian disinformation, the ecosystem can be spread out in 5 pillars, going from the very visible pillars being official government communication, for example, the embassies or Kremlin writing something officially about where they're trying to change public opinion in the European Union, to state-funded global messaging. That can be Russia Today, it can be TASS, all these big public institutions, media public institutions that are getting money from the Russian state and therefore also spreading this. And continuing down into the less visible and more obscure actors. That is, for example, having a cultivated proxy source can be one of the most interesting things I've seen is an entire resource organization that doesn't exist. So you make an entire website with 20 researchers that doesn't exist, with tons of articles that has never been published anywhere that are generated and put into the website. And you have this organization seem like an entire research organization saying things that supports these things. And the researchers are then invited into these state official, state-funded global messaging places. So they will come out with research saying, it was actually Ukraine who made this war. They will then be invited into Russia Today that will say, hey, we got this expert from this brilliant research place that has actually found that Ukraine made the war. And it will then come out on Kremlin saying, Ukraine should stop this war now. So just to give you an idea of that the 5-pillar system helps us to show how different channels are supporting each other and making the potential intervention from Russia stronger. More concretely, we looked for some of the more hidden accounts down here, not that many. And then we built, from other projects, we have built this pretty big population now of 1,500 channels that are to some degree affiliated with Russia. So it can be, of course, the very obvious one where they write it on their own websites, but it can also be proxy sources where we from other studies or other researchers' studies can know that this source is actually supported by Kremlin in some way or some way affiliated with them in funding or ideologically. Based on these actors, these profiles, we draw out 1.8 million posts and videos from these 4 platforms. And this will be the last a lot of numbers, and then I'll stop putting numbers on you. So basically, this was what we got, drawing out by scraping, by APIs, by different ways of getting data. And we then run it through different filters, looking for places where these Russian affiliated accounts are talking specifically about Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, or places where they talk specifically about the EU election and try to engage with that. We also look down into the comments on these pages because sometimes they can have like an account saying something and then they will have some bots coming in and supporting and bursting these places. So we also look in the comments. And then we try also to run over some algorithms, as I said before, looking for bursts, looking for ways where something has been amplified or where we can see some coordination in links being shared across platforms. All of this was analyzed and given on to the OSINT and then further to the fact checkers. So what did we find? We found different disinformation narratives as well as social media profiles showing signs of potential inauthentic behavior. So we did find profiles And that is no surprise. It always happens. I always like to tell a story about Denmark where I think it's 6 years ago, there was a breaking news on Altinget in Denmark, the Danish newspaper, that they have found 5 Russian bots. And that's just to give you an idea that 5 Russian bots is today nothing. It doesn't matter. And it's a joke when you find it. And here, the same thing. So when we say this, we say, yeah, we did find some profiles, but we found nothing in the size that actually had any impact. We did also find one interesting case of coordinated behavior that came out where we saw the hashtag vote for Charlie were being shared quite a lot. Charlie is the Sweden Democrats' top candidate. So over the course of 7 days, this hashtag was shared more than 2,200 times. But we found no Russian disinformation where we were able to say this is clearly Russian. So to conclude our study, we found no substantial evidence for large-scale coordinated disinformation efforts. And that could have been my presentation today. This is where I started. And then I thought, yeah, that's a little boring, right? I could also give you more cases, and then you can get more feeling that a lot of things were going on in these dark places of the web. But that would be a lie because we don't see any impact from it. So it will also be like drawing a little too far. I mean, all these, as the speaker before said, they only got 5 likes or something like that. So, no, I mean, if we don't see any impact, we will still, in the end, I will still have to present this slide for you and say we saw no coordinated, large-scale evidence for disinformation. But does this mean that neither Sweden, Denmark, and Finland were hit by disinformation campaigns during this period? That is actually the question that we should to think about. And I think that was also what we did in the work group. We started to think, are we going to this in the wrong way? Has things changed so much that this is actually no longer the way that we should work with this? So my part 2 are we looking at this problem the wrong way? Because, I mean, the evidence out there that we should be nervous for this are quite clear. Even though we've done a couple of studies as the one I've showed you, I think we've done like 7 or 8 of this kind of studies I just showed you, and we never found anything impactful. It stands in like some disagreement with the global perspective on this, where I think the most convincing example is the OECD at Davos, who has this panel of 3,000 risk experts, 3,000 risk experts from the entire world that were asked, what are the most dangerous things facing the global world right now? And they say, on long term, it's extreme weather, but on short term, the single most dangerous thing facing our world right now is AI-generated misinformation and disinformation. How can this panel come up and say this is the number 1 danger, not cost of living crisis or cyber attacks and political polarization, AI-driven disinformation? How can they say that? And we can then make the 7th study where we conclude that the election were not swayed. How is that possible? I'll give you 3 examples, and I'll take the case of Denmark because I'm Danish and I know most about this, but I'm quite sure we would have found the same in Sweden and Finland. I'll take the case of Khalif, the boxer from the OL, who many of you probably know about. We discussed her gender all summer, all of us. It was all over the news. We saw the Southport riots, and we saw how people went to the street because 3 kids were killed. It was a terrible tragedy, and a lot of British people went crazy about that, of course. And then I think a lot of you, how many in here have heard about bedbugs in Paris being a problem? Yeah, right? Don't want to go there. So my point here is that all of these cases have something in common. They are also all global news. They never targeted Denmark or targeted Germany. Some of them might have targeted Paris or England, but not really. That was not where the biggest problem was. They're all global news. They all managed to spread to local national agendas. They actually managed to change things. In Denmark, this discussion went to the level where the Minister of Equality went out and wrote a co-op where she said, and I quote, that we should remove some of the rights for transgender people due to this Khalif's case. The other thing they have in common is that they're all affiliated with Russian interventions. It's always difficult to show exactly how, but this case originally started by the Russian boxing organization making some DNA tests. It came out as a media story 1 year before the OL at Russia Today and TASS, and nonetheless it was picked up in Denmark and the rest of the world a year later as something completely fair to discuss. We know the bedbox case. There were bedbox problems in Paris, but it was amplified and it was pushed out to a degree where you can say this was actually not like a normal story. In Southport, the disinformation both happens within the country, where local people changed the perspective, saying this was not a British person doing it, it was a boat refugee, and the person had just landed, and they changed kind of the background story to make it worse, and it was then amplified by Russian actors. So my point is that while we have been busy staring into that white wall over here, looking for some affiliation, application or swaying of the European election, all these three cases actually happened at the same time. All these three cases managed to spread to our national news, and all these three cases had concrete impact on our politics. So the Russian managed to get us to discuss these things. They managed us to polarize and get fear for what happened, for like polarizing around right, left wing, but also fear the Paris where I didn't want to go on vacation any longer. So they managed to do all the things that they actually want with a disinformation campaign. And only, and here I'm talking about Denmark, it might have been different other places, only the Southport case actually managed to be handled by national news. So 2 or 3 national news medias came out with an article afterwards saying, yeah, there might have been something with this Khalif thing. We're not really sure. Nothing more. And the bedbox says I'm not seeing any of that yet. So what I want to point out here, and what I'm trying to get to, is that we have a problem, not of finding these small things, but apparently all the good work happening in EDMO, in European level, are not getting out into the news. It's not reaching the national news. We're not able to work with the cases when we find them and to get them out in public, which means that they're actually in many ways succeeding and not failing. So the second thing that we did in our project, and this is why I wanted to talk about it here, was that we tried to look at how should the collaboration about these problems be in the future. And we made this fantastic visualization, right? Very techish. And that's basically just saying a more simple thing would be to say, well, if we need to work against this problem, we need not to have us as data specialists working down here and then has the fact checkers up here and the OSINT here, which is today what we're seeing most of the places. And sorry, Lina, I'll just pull you out. I'm not. Lina said before, it's very difficult to get data and we need some laws. We have those laws and we are applying for data right now through them. And that's showing how we're not connecting too much, because that's something we know as data specialists because we work with it every day. We know now we have a right in the European Union to get these data. And that's just a very good example of why we need to move closer to this. And we need also to move to make sure that when it comes through the fact checkers, we need to get it into national news. And we need to make sure that no stories about Khalif or bedbugs are left there and just saying, okay, yeah, we found out. But we need to make sure that everyone who saw those stories also know it for the next time. So how could that look? And this is probably my last slide. This is what we're looking into right now. We were trying to find out a way to build a national media defense system. I cannot find a better English word. It sounds a little less like defense kind of thing on Danish. We don't have that word. We call it a værn, media værn. But a way to set up where we can have a constant monitoring of the global news. So we want to look at the global news where the Russians are actively working to push. So we'll try to monitor and see what are the big stories that they're trying to push out and to what degree are they floating into our countries. And when they're floating into our countries, when we know that they are engaged in some big global news like the Khalif or the bedbugs, we want to make sure that those stories are spread out to the national news. And then I know Thomas is sitting here. He will probably say, We're trying, they're not listening. And here I think what we need to change is our perspective. And this will be the last thing. I hope I haven't lost all of you. How many is still following along? Okay, yeah. I was getting a little difficult. We have been obsessed of finding a smoking gun. We have obsessed of finding bots or places where we can say this was by certainty a Russian bot that spread this. It might only have spread to 20 people, but it was Russian. We know. We have to give up on that. And then we have to be inspired by what you do in election processes. This is from Georgia, who had the election a few months ago, where we are pretty sure the Russian and the government changed some things, right? No one knew that for certain. They cannot show. So instead of going out and say, we know the Russian changed this election, Georgian people, you should go to the street, they all said, we have concerns with the process. And this is what we need to go out. We need to get Tjekdet and other fact-checking medias to reach out to medias and make sure that they run the stories to say, yes, there is a case about Kyiv, but we have concerns that this case might actually not be a normal story, but a story from Russia. We need to make sure that when the bedbox case come out and we learn from somewhere in Europe that this is actually probably Russian attempts to infiltrate, we need to have someone say, yes, there are bedbugs in Paris, it is a problem, but we have concerns with. This is the way that the current place where we're looking right now, and we're looking into like trying to build a platform for that. That was all.
Tobias, for both for the presentation and for the argument that it is provocative, but it also, I think it resonates with a lot of people in the audience, including me. But I think we will open for a couple of questions now before we move on. So Andreas first.
Yeah, hi, Andreas Sandfors for your Media Institute. We are trying to train journalists in fact-checking and verification skills, but your question goes much further. How are we going to link the massive amount of investigative work that is done by fact-checkers and the news communities? And I don't have a quick fix, but you were opening up that door, so I'd like you to say something more bold about that. How can we achieve that?
Okay, so more bold things. I'm already like far outside my comfort zone. But what I think is that we have to invite the journalist onto. So I think there are always organizational boundaries that are a problem. I think Thomas we talked about that a couple of times. Like, how do we get someone from one media to be interested in other media's work? That is a little difficult. So what we're looking into here is that we need to invite the fact checkers into a room together with the journalist, and maybe make some journalists get this as their one of the common grounds to write about. So they are known, like all journalists have these areas where they specialize. We need all the news to at least have one journalist who is specialized in writing these kind of stories where, we all thought it was Kyiv. We found out it was maybe Russian infiltration. And I think that is a really important argument, because if we don't have this ongoingly, there will be only random debugging, as you probably experience when you train it, because that's also part of it. But I think that is succeeding in some degree. Okay.
Hi, is this on? Yes.
Yes.
My name is Oscar. I work at the European Parliament in Denmark. I'm very happy to hear that we weren't targets of Russian disinformation, anyways, that they didn't help promote anything wrong. My question is, perhaps should be targeted at Russian disinformation actors, but I'm going to target it at you instead.
Yeah.
Why weren't there any big effect from Russian disinformation in the European Parliament elections? So it was a big fear. Why didn't they succeed?
Yeah, you want a true story?
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, so we all have to get funding for our work. And what we can always get funding for is to run this kind of setup. A little before, that actually takes some consideration to say that, and a little afterwards, and then primarily around it. That is what all organizations that hire someone or us to do these studies are interested in. What is the single most difficult time to infiltrate something or spread a message? That is exactly this period. This is where everyone is discussing politics. Everyone has their guard up. Everyone knows that things are going on and politics are a little more rough than normally. This is the one time where you don't want to spend time on it. If I was a Russian disinformation campaign, I would send all my employees home for vacation around here and then start up afterwards. And I think that is what they're doing in many ways. But of course, it makes sense. It makes political sense that you monitor this and you can go out and say, yes, we have someone looking into elections, but it's not a good time to target us. Yes, so the question was why have the Nordic countries been spared? I think that we are, as we always think, we're the center of the world, right? But if you look at any other map, we are not. So we are actually quite outside. So I think it's a resource thing that they will rather affect Germany or France. I don't believe the argument, and we had some discussion in the community about that. I really don't think that it's anything to do with our media literacy. I mean, yes, it's better, but we made some tests in Norway, for example, where we asked people, can you identify this disinformation campaign? And they are worse than flipping a coin, most people. So I really don't believe in that idea that we should be able to look through these things. I think rather that we're just not an interesting target. And maybe a second point, we're not an interesting target. And why target a specific country? If you can go in with success and pick out some cases that are already running, all these cases have, of course, some truth to them. They're not completely made up. And simply amplify this, and you can hit so many countries. So I think they're also like any social media analyst will do. They're looking at numbers and saying, yeah, we did all this in Sweden, and it had like this small effect. Then we made the Caliph case, and it spread to like millions of people around the globe. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We unfortunately don't have time for more questions, and so we'll have to introduce the next speaker. But thank you very much.
Thank you.